tissues and crying and crying. And then I thought, look, I've got to get a grip here and do something useful for Diana. And I decided the first thing that needed to be done was to find somebody to write and deliver the eulogy.
A single sheet of pale blue paper sealed away for almost 30 years has reportedly just rewritten everything we thought we understood about two women the press spent decades pitting against each other. And the strangest part isn't even what the letter allegedly says, it's who kept it hidden and why they never said a word. For as long as most of us have been alive, the story sold to the public was simple. Diana was the warm one, the emotional one, the princess who cried on camera and gave the world access to her pain. Anne was the opposite, stiff, dutiful, allegedly unbothered by sentiment, more comfortable with horses than with people. Royal commentators built entire careers on that contrast. It made for a clean narrative, except according to what's now surfacing, it may have been almost entirely wrong. Let's set the scene, because how this document reportedly came to light matters just as much as its contents. Charles Spencer, Diana's brother, is said to have been going through a routine review of family archival material at Althorp House, the Spencer estate in Northamptonshire that's been in the family for nearly 5 centuries. Somewhere in that process, according to people close to the family, a mahogany box surfaced from a vault beneath the house, one that reportedly hadn't been opened in years. Inside, wrapped and preserved, was a single handwritten letter dated the 10th of August 1997. If that date means nothing to you at first glance, sit with it for a second. It's 21 days before Diana died in Paris. Every word on that page, if the account is accurate, was written by a woman who had roughly 3 weeks left to live, though of course she couldn't have known that at the time. Before we go further into what this letter reportedly contains, if you're the kind of person who finds this era of royal history endlessly layered, the alliances, the silences, the things that only make sense decades later, this is exactly the kind of story we dig into here. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one, because there's more coming on this particular thread. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting, because Spencer apparently didn't rush this to the press. According to sources describing the process, he spent close to 2 days having the document examined by a forensic handwriting specialist, cross-referencing ink patterns and pressure points against a library of verified Diana correspondence already held in the Spencer family archive. The reported conclusion: consistent, authentic, unmistakably hers. Only after that verification did anyone outside a very small circle allegedly learn the letter existed at all. So what does it reportedly say? This is where the story shifts from interesting historical footnote to something with real emotional weight. According to accounts of the letter's content, Diana wasn't writing to a friend from her social circle, and she wasn't writing to anyone in her immediate inner circle of confidants. She was allegedly writing to Princess Anne, her sister-in-law, a woman history has generally painted as someone she had little in common with. And she wasn't writing about fashion or public appearances or anything trivial. She was reportedly writing about her sons. The letter is said to describe Diana's growing unease that summer about what she perceived as a rigid, institutional approach being taken toward raising William and Harry, an approach she reportedly feared would strip away their emotional development in favor of producing 2 properly trained future royals. And according to what's been described, she didn't address Anne with any of the formal distance you'd expect between 2 royal women of that era. She allegedly just wrote Anne, plainly, intimately, like she was writing to someone she trusted completely rather than someone she barely knew. That detail alone is worth sitting with. If accurate, it suggests a closeness between these 2 women that never once made it into 30 years of documentaries, biographies, or tabloid coverage, which raises an obvious question: how does something like that stay completely hidden for 3 decades? We'll get to that. But first, we need to talk about how this letter reportedly even reached Anne in the first place, because apparently it didn't go through any normal channel at all. According to the accounts circulating now, Diana was reportedly wary that some of her correspondence being monitored by senior figures within the palace household, a concern that whether or not it was justified, clearly shaped her behavior. So instead of using official posts, she's said to have relied on an informal network, sometimes used among younger aristocratic circles, to move private letters without them passing through formal channels. A trusted driver allegedly carried the sealed letter directly to the stables at Gatcombe Park, Anne's private estate in Gloucestershire, and handed it to a member of Anne's household staff with instructions that it go straight to her, quietly, without fuss, no palace mailroom, no official correspondence log, just a private letter moving privately between 2 women, allegedly bypassing the very institution both of them were part of. Now, before we get further into what happened on Anne's end, it's worth pausing on the actual content of what Diana reportedly feared, because according to the letter's described contents, this wasn't vague anxiety. She apparently referenced having learned through a source she trusted inside palace administration of specific discussions about scaling back her personal security arrangements. The letter reportedly frames this as part of a broader pattern designed to pressure her into giving up control of her independent public presence, Whether that characterization was accurate, exaggerated by the stress of an extraordinarily difficult year, or something in between, we simply don't know. What we do know is that this is reportedly what she believed, and reportedly what she wrote down weeks before her death. She also allegedly referenced an old and rarely invoked legal mechanism tied to royal family law, something rooted in an 18th century statute governing royal marriages that she feared could theoretically be used to assert greater institutional control over decisions involving her son's upbringing, education, and daily lives. Again, this is described as her belief, her interpretation, written under significant personal strain. It's not a confirmed legal maneuver that palace officials have ever acknowledged, but it's reportedly the fear driving the entire letter. And her concern, according to the account, wasn't really about herself. It was about what she saw as a system that treated William and Harry less like children who needed warmth and more like future institutional assets who needed shaping. She's said to have described the senior administrative structure around the family in almost corporate terms, a body more concerned with continuity and image than with two boys growing up in the middle of an unraveling marriage and soon after unimaginable loss. This is apparently the moment the letter turns from historical curiosity into something genuinely moving. Diana is said to have written that out of everyone in the entire royal household, Anne was the one person she believed had the backbone to push back against that system if it ever came to that. Not because they were close friends in any conventional sense, by most public accounts they weren't, but because Diana reportedly saw in Anne something the tabloids never gave her credit for: quiet, unshakable resolve. Let's talk about Anne for a moment, because this is really where the emotional core of the story lives. For 30 years, if this account holds up, Anne knew things about her brother's family and her former sister-in-law's fears that essentially nobody else did, and she said nothing. Not in interviews, she's famously given almost none. Not in memoirs, not in any of the countless documentaries that have picked apart every angle of Diana's life and death. According to reports now surfacing, her copy of the letter sat in a secure safe at Gatcombe Park, tucked among personal papers, essentially untouched for 3 decades. Think about what that means if it's true. While the public narrative painted Anne as the cold, unsentimental royal, the one who supposedly had no particular warmth for Diana, she was reportedly sitting on a letter in which Diana specifically named her as the person she trusted most to protect her sons. And instead of using that, instead of correcting the record, instead of positioning herself publicly as Diana's chosen protector, Anne allegedly just did the work quietly. Sources have pointed to patterns in Anne's schedule during the years following Diana's death, an apparent tendency to be present at Windsor during school holidays, low-key, without press coverage, without any public framing of it as anything other than a family member spending time with her nephews. If she was reportedly honoring something Diana asked of her in that letter, she never said so. She just showed up, allegedly, again and again, without ever explaining why. Why keep something like that private for so long? The most plausible explanation, according to royal commentators discussing this story, comes down to institutional stability. Anne has spent her entire adult life as one of the most consistently active working royals, someone whose role has always been defined by service to the institution rather than personal narrative building. Publicly revealing a letter that framed palace administration in an unflattering light during the sensitive years immediately following Diana's death, while the monarchy was already facing intense public scrutiny, could have triggered exactly the kind of institutional crisis Anne, by all accounts, has spent her career trying to avoid creating. So she reportedly chose silence for 30 years. That silence only appears to have ended recently, and according to accounts of how this played out, it wasn't a unilateral decision by Charles Spencer to simply go public. Sources suggest he traveled to see Anne directly before any of this became public, laying out what his team's forensic analysis had confirmed, and making the case that, with the letter now authenticated beyond reasonable doubt, continuing to keep it hidden risked looking less like discretion and more like concealment. According to this account, Anne listened, considered it, and ultimately gave her quiet approval for the material to be verified against her own long-held copy before anything moved forward publicly. That detail matters because it suggests this wasn't a leak or a scandal breaking against anyone's wishes. It was reportedly a deliberate, mutual decision by two people who had each held a piece of this story privately for decades, choosing the moment to finally let it surface together. Once it did surface, the reaction, at least according to how it's being described, was significant. Royal watchers and commentators processing the story have noted the almost immediate shift in public sentiment toward Anne, with many expressing something close to admiration for a woman who apparently carried this quietly for 30 years, rather than using it to shape her own public image. It's a strange kind of vindication, if the story holds, the cold royal turning out to have been, allegedly, the one carrying the heaviest emotional weight of all. And it raises uncomfortable questions for the institution more broadly. If Diana genuinely believed, even briefly, even under enormous personal stress, that the palace administrative structure around her was working against her interests and her son's well-being, what does it mean that this belief is only becoming public now, nearly 3 decades later? Was it simply a reflection of an extraordinarily difficult period in her life, written under conditions no one should have to endure? Or does it point to something more structural about how palace administration operated during that era, something that's genuinely worth examining rather than dismissing? We don't have confirmed answers to those questions, and it's worth being honest about that. The palace hasn't issued detailed public commentary addressing the specific claims in the letter, and it's unlikely any official statement will go much further than acknowledging its existence as a private family document. That's often how these things go, verified as authentic but never fully explained. What's also worth noting, and what tends to get lost in stories like this, is how this reportedly affected the next generation. If accounts are accurate that William was informed about the letter and its contents before any public reveal, his reported response is notable in itself. Sources suggest he declined to participate in any messaging that would soften or reframe his mother's original words, instead treating the letter as an authentic piece of his own family history that didn't need palace polish. Whether that's precisely how the conversation unfolded, we can't say with certainty, but the general shape of it, a reluctance to smooth over something raw and personal, fits with how William has generally approached questions about his mother's legacy in recent years. There's also the matter of what else Diana reportedly referenced in that same letter, a mention, according to some accounts, of a separate personal archive of letters and diary material she'd apparently set aside outside of any official royal collection, seemingly as a kind of safeguard. Whether that archive exists, where it might be, and whether it will ever surface publicly is at this point pure speculation. But it's the kind of detail that tends to linger in stories like this, a loose thread that never quite gets resolved and that keeps people watching for what might come next. Stepping back from the specifics, what makes this story resonate isn't really the legal theories or the administrative maneuvering Diana reportedly feared. It's the human core underneath all of it, a mother, weeks from death though she couldn't have known it, reportedly reaching out to the one person in an entire institution she believed would actually protect her children if it came down to it. And that person allegedly spent 30 years honoring that request without ever once claiming credit for it publicly. If even part of this account is accurate, it complicates almost everything we thought we understood about the relationship between these two women and about how the institution around them actually functioned behind closed doors during one of the most scrutinized periods in modern royal history. It suggests that the public version of events, rivals, opposites, distant in-laws with nothing in common, may have been a surface-level story obscuring something far more complicated and, frankly, more human underneath. Whether more details emerge, whether that reported second archive of letters ever comes to light, whether the palace ever offers anything beyond a carefully worded acknowledgement, that's genuinely unclear right now. But if this story has taught us anything, it's that some of the most important parts of royal history apparently aren't found in official statements or state occasions. They're found in a locked box, a private letter, and 30 years of someone choosing to say absolutely nothing at all. What else might still be sitting in a safe somewhere waiting for its moment? That's the part we'll be watching closely.